I just always loved nursing. Always wanted to be a nurse since I was 7. My aunt was a nurse, and she used to go to work with her white uniform and her handkerchief in her pocket with her pin, her hat on, and her white shoulders perfume. And I always looked at her and said, oh, I'm going to be a nurse just like her.
You know, where else do you work that you see pain and suffering and dying and illness all the time, your whole shift? And it can take a toll on you. All of us have cried with people.
Like I say, when I was, 12, 13, I decided I wanted to be a nurse, and I've never regretted it. I like taking care of people. I like making them feel better and sending them home. That was the best part of it.
We had a lot of incidents where people were shot, injured from fights, but the police and the fire were always wonderful. Sometimes we didn't even know they were coming through the door, and all of a sudden we'd just get a rush of people, and the police and the fire bringing these people in that were injured, and we just had to deal with it.
I enjoyed visiting the patients before surgery, talking to them, and visiting them after surgery.
So many people have said since, I wish Choate was still there.
Yeah.
I wish Choate was still there. They wish it hadn't closed.
When the Mayflower landed at Plymouth Rock in 1620, there were 2 physicians aboard, Miles Standish and Samuel Fuller. Medicine, however, was not practiced as we know it today. Most doctors were not surgeons, and many surgeons were not doctors. Often you could not tell the difference between a surgeon and a barber, or for that matter, a barber from a doctor. In fact, they all practiced some form of medicine. As the years passed and knowledge increased, formal education became necessary. The first medical school in America was founded in Philadelphia in 1765. In colonial times, doctors traveled from community to community. In 1670, Susanna Brooks is listed in town records as the first practitioner of medicine in Woburn. By 1692, Woburn's population was 550. Woburn's first resident physician appeared in 1719 with the arrival of Dr. Peters. In 1890, Dr. Alice G. Bryant became Woburn's first female resident physician. The next year, Woburn was beset with the La Grippe epidemic. As Woburn's population increased, the need for additional doctors grew. Woburn's most famous doctor was perhaps Dr. John M. Harlow. As a physician in Vermont, he was called to treat a patient named Phineas Gage, who had sustained a serious injury. While working with explosives in clearing rocks from a railroad train bed, an explosion set an iron tamping rod through his cheek that exited at the top of his skull. Phineas survived, and Dr. Harlow continued treating him as mental issues afflicted his patient after the brain injury. Phineas died in San Francisco in 1860. By the time that he had arrived in Woburn in 1860, Dr. Harlow had already achieved fame. While he practiced in Woburn with an office at the Central House, he published a medical paper that detailed his follow-up care given to Mr. Gage that remains today a forerunner of brain injury therapy. During the Civil War, he received an appointment as an examining physician for Army recruits. He was a close friend of Charles Choate. He was also a losing mayoral candidate in 1894 and died in 1907, leaving an estate worth $225,000. In his will, he left a bequest to Massachusetts General Hospital establishing a ward to support free beds. Residents of Woburn were to be preferred. Dr. Harlow was named the town's physician in 1871, just in time to treat those affected by the Great Fire of 1873. The biggest fire in the history of Woburn began in the second-story office of a photographer at the corner of Main and Walnut Street. By the time that it was discovered, the fire had engulfed the building. Strong winds spread the fire rapidly northward along Main Street. While firefighters arrived quickly, a lack of water hindered their effort. Woburn's only newspaper, the Middlesex Journal, reported this account on the following day. The calamity so often expected and so greatly dreaded has at last come upon our town, and in a few hours one of our churches, 4 business buildings, and a dwelling house were consumed, entailing a loss of not less than $50,000. The entire square from Walnut Street to Everett Street is burned, and what was one of the business spots in town is now a scene of desolation. Local doctors treated those in need, but no record of injuries was located. As a footnote to the disaster, there was looting, and police responded with quick action. The fire, however, attracted attention from a criminal element in Boston, and the railroad train heading to Woburn was stopped, and the alleged thieves and roughnecks were forced to exit the train. The train continued on to Woburn, carrying members of the press and Boston firefighters. The local newspaper reported on this event by noting that there were thieves enough at home without reinforcements from abroad. The need for a comprehensive medical facility was readily apparent on 2 occasions in the 1800s. The epidemic of 1872 brought the highly infectious disease smallpox to Woburn, and it devastated the community. It left 18 people dead and forced the town to build a smallpox hospital on the grounds of the Poor Farm. As a result of this disease, the Board of Health was established, and in its report described the smallpox hospital. Quote, "A small but ample and convenient building was constructed, plainly and completely furnished, and provided with all the necessary accommodations for nurses and patients." End quote. 2 nurses, A.P. Roberts and Sarah Parks, were brought in to care for patients. The Board of Health did take strong action in quarantining smallpox victims to their homes and inoculated the populace with vaccinations which proved successful. The smallpox hospital was dedicated to those who contracted the disease and couldn't afford to pay for their care, or lived in crowded sections of the town where it may be unsafe to be in contact with others. Many will remember the Poor Farm. Remnants of the farm were still visible in the 1960s. It was located at the current site of the Kennedy Junior High School on Middle Street. About 50 acres of land was purchased by the town in 1838 to care for its poor. If you were destitute and could not rely on family, friends, or your church, you were at the mercy of the overseer of the poor, a town official. There was no welfare. In exchange for performing farm duties, the Poor Farm or Town Farm would provide food and shelter. On April 1st, 1895, another disaster struck Woburn. A boiler exploded at the Loring Tannery on Conn Street. In a tragic moment, 5 men lost their lives. Many were injured, some permanently disabled. While every doctor in the city responded to the call, modern facilities were not available to address serious injuries. The most poignant story may concern the plight of Patrick Riley. Both of his legs were crushed by a large boiler piece. After being brought to his home on Salem Street, his condition was deemed critical. He was transported to the railway station and taken by train to Massachusetts General Hospital, where he died 5 hours later, absorbing incredible suffering. One can only speculate whether having a local hospital could have saved this man or avoided permanent disability for others. It should be noted that neither medical care nor medical insurance existed for these workers. If you got injured and could not work, you did not get paid, and in some cases your job would be in jeopardy. Similar to the evolution of doctors, nursing in America began with informal care, with homegrown remedies, handed down from mother to daughter. It wasn't until the exploits of Florence Nightingale and the heroic efforts of women in the Civil War did the necessity for formal education and rules of nursing come to the forefront. The force for recognizing nursing as a profession began in the early 1900s. All health care was local, and while the number of doctors increased, hospitals were usually located in large cities, and early facilities for Woburn residents only existed in Boston. If you needed emergency services, local doctors could only prepare you for the long trek to Boston. Woburn's population in 1900 was 14,254. A large group of Woburn business leaders and local physicians decided that Woburn deserved a more comprehensive treatment center, and they set about the task of getting that done. The Woburn Charitable Association was formed in 1908 for the purpose of maintaining a hospital and other charities. President Elmer E. Silver and Vice Presidents Judge John G. McGuire and John W. Johnson were elected to lead this organization, along with a number of trustees including James Skinner, Edward Johnson, Everett Fox, and William Biggs, to name a few. Following the approval of the charter by the legislature on December 2, 1908, the corporation accepted on December 16, 1908, the deed to the Charles Choate estate on Warren Avenue for Mrs. Martha F. Johnson, daughter, and Mrs. Helen O. Sprague, granddaughter of Charles Choate. He was a leading citizen of the previous century who was a manufacturer, politician, and public-spirited citizen. This put into motion the process of retrofitting the home into a viable hospital. The citizens of Woburn contributed more than $10,000 for making the necessary changes and furnishing the hospital appropriately. On June 29, 1909, the Charles Choate Memorial Hospital opened for business. Inviting all Woburn citizens to an open house, President Silver's speech illustrates the passion underlying this project. He proclaimed the Choate as the People's Hospital. It was an all-inclusive effort, epitomizing the public spirit of Woburn people. It was a hospital, he said, equipped by the people, supported by the people, and used by the people of Woburn. It opened that day having accommodations for 13 patients. Recognizing the need for skilled nurses, a training school was immediately put into operation, and 7 nurses graduated on June 12, 1912. The training school was affiliated with Massachusetts General Hospital, and trainees spent 3 months there. Classroom studies were conducted at the Warren Academy across the street from the hospital. Miss Hinckley trained this first class and was also the only trained nurse when the hospital opened. Only one woman from Woburn, Mrs. Frida Yates Granger, graduated in this class. This training school for nurses drew candidates from all over the country and Canada. It wasn't until 1932 that the entire graduating class was Woburn residents. No sooner had the hospital opened than it became apparent more nurses and more rooms were needed. Additional nurses required living quarters. Mrs. Helen O. Sprague, one of the original hospital benefactors, conveyed the deed to the Finney estate, adjacent to the hospital, on December 2, 1910, for the purpose of a nurses' home to be known as the Martha Choate Johnson Memorial. This was not only convenient for the hospital, but the location was across the street from the Warren Academy, where the nursing students spent their classroom time. Once again, ordinary citizens of Woburn responded with donations of over $3,000 to equip and furnish the home. The nurses' quarters opened in 1911. Finding the original Choate home too small to accommodate the growing needs of the community, the board voted on March 13, 1916, to proceed with plans for constructing an addition to the hospital. Besides the large number of donations and bequests, they received a bequest under the will of Francis K. Harlow for $20,000 for the erection of the Dr. John M. Harlow Surgery, and a $20,000 gift from the Beggs family for an addition to be known as the William Beggs Memorial. The plans called for a maternity ward and nursery, a heating plant, a laundry, and other additions deemed necessary. When completed, the hospital now housed 50 beds, additional ward accommodations, 2 semi-private rooms, and 13 additional private rooms. It also provided an isolation ward for contagious cases. As the hospital grew and services increased, the schedule of charges was updated. In 1922, a bed in a ward cost $3.50 per day after a $2 admission charge. A private room on the second floor with a private bath cost a patient the exorbitant amount of $8 per day after a $5 admission charge. While the building of the hospital is worthy of discussion, so too is the response to tragedies and epidemics. In only its 10th year of operation, the Choate Memorial Hospital was put to the test. The great pandemic of 1918 struck the world at large, and Woburn was not spared. While World War I had claimed an estimated 16 million lives, the influenza epidemic killed an estimated 50 million people worldwide. In America, 25% of the population was afflicted, and the average life expectancy dropped by 12 years. Woburn suffered with over 600 cases of influenza. In Woburn, our community hospital had never before been faced with such a crisis, but the staff and administration responded valiantly. At the peak of the epidemic, all rooms, hallways, and offices were filled with patients. They accepted patients from Burlington and Wilmington, communities without a hospital, and Winchester, who did have one. Apparently, Winchester Hospital was refusing to accept influenza patients, at least early in the crisis, despite the urgent requests of Choate officials. In his book, Woburn, A Past Observed, John McElhenney tells this story from the pages of the Woburn Daily Times. A man from the, quote, Italian colony, end quote, in the north end of Winchester was refused admittance to the Winchester Hospital. He turned to the Choate Hospital where he was admitted. President of the hospital, Elmer E. Silver, stated that the Choate would take any sick person, no matter what color or nationality, and regardless of their ability to pay. He was recognized in the Woburn Daily Times for his laudable actions during the crisis. President Silver was the original president of the hospital and led the hospital for 33 years until his death in 1941. A prominent citizen, he was president of the Woburn 5-cent Savings Bank for 22 years, active in the insurance industry in his earlier life, and admired for his overall business acumen, especially on behalf of the Choate Memorial Hospital. Besides stories relating to the hospital's reaction to major catastrophes, there were many small but significant human interest stories of caring responses to individual tragedies. In 1913, 11-year-old Thomas Kelly fell beneath the wheels of a Whiting Company's milk wagon. He was helping to deliver milk at the corner of Main and High Street and lost his footing, and both wheels passed over his body. The accident occurred as church services were concluding at St. Charles Church, and both Patrolman Timothy Walsh and Dr. William Kelleher were among the first to respond and find the unconscious boy. An ambulance brought him to the Choate Hospital, and Dr. Kelleher examined him, fearing internal injuries. Ultimately, young Mr. Kelly recovered, having severe cuts to his face and 3 broken ribs. The success and prestige of the Charles Choate Memorial Hospital was further enhanced by the formation of the Hospital Aid Association on June 10, 1910, and all women of Woburn were urged to join. In its annual report of 1921, the Woburn Charitable Association noted the impressive work of this society on behalf of the hospital by, quote, attending to the mending and looking after and supplying the linen, dishes, and glassware, and helping in many other ways, end quote. As the years passed, the Aid Association took on a more important role. This social group became a fundraising arm of the hospital. Year after year, the association held May parties, brought musicals to the city, held dances, and conducted spring flower sales, all in an effort to keep our hospital solvent and prosperous. The hospital continued to serve Woburn. Neither the turbulent impact of the Depression in the 1930s nor the disruptive actions of World War II could halt the hospital's commitment to the community. There were financial concerns during this period, but the storms were weathered. New trustees were bringing renewed vigor to the corporation. Kenneth B. Williams took over as president following the passing of Elmer Silver. The 1930s and 40s saw a greater influence of nurses on the growth of the hospital. The new nurses' home was opened for occupancy, and an influx of Woburn women entered the profession and enrolled in the training school. The commitment of these women to nursing became a valuable strength for the hospital. Nurses were entering both the public and private sectors. As the years passed, nurses took on greater responsibility, and the training regimen became more intense. Many of you will recognize these Woburn women that served our community with distinction.
How did you come about deciding to go into nursing?
Well, when I was 12 years old, I got sick and was taken to Mass General, and I had double pneumonia and meningitis, and I was in the hospital for a month, and I admired what the nurses were doing, and I made up my mind that was what I wanted to be. It was at the beginning of World War II. The government started this program to get more young ladies into the professions to be able to treat the wounded, because being in a war there'd be several wounded, so they were looking ahead. And they paid us $15 a month the first year, $20 a month the second year, and $30 a month the last 6 months.
So
We had to promise that we'd go into the armed forces, whether it was the Army or the Navy or what, and sign up for the duration of the war.
now that never happened for you though, correct?
No, by the time I graduated, the war was over.
How many were in your class when you went in?
There was 10.
And what year was this that you went in? 19?
We went in, Choate usually had a class once a year in September, but because of the war, they started a February class, and we were the first February class, so we went in February of 1944. I graduated June of '43 from the high school. We went into Warren Academy, and it was Warren Academy School of Nursing, affiliated with the Charles Choate Memorial Hospital.
Now you start, and what is your first job, and how did you come into the OR?
Well, as I said, I asked for the operating room because being a patient at the Boston hospitals and watching the nurses come and go and listening to their conversation, I was 12 years old. I thought I'd like to try the operating room.
Wow.
My main reason to go into training after I was a patient at the Mass General was in those days you needed to be a registered nurse to become an airline hostess. And first, that was my first choice. In fact, when I graduated high school, I went into Eastern Airlines, took the test and everything else, passed the test, but I was 8 pounds overweight, so they refused me. They told me, go home, lose weight, and come back. But by that time, I started to work, and I wanted to try the operating room. And I liked the operating room so much that I forgot about the airlines.
What did you like about the operating room? What appealed to you?
I think knowing that the patient came in sick with, say, appendicitis, and we were able to remove that and make them better.
The blood and all that, that stuff never bothered you?
No.
Right. Well, see, that's what you cut from that cloth that can deal with it.
No, it didn't. When I was a kid, it bothered me before I went into nursing. But no, it didn't bother me once as I said, we could be eating a sandwich and watching the bloody sponges. Because we would have to, when I first went in the operating room, we had to soak those bloody sponges, send them to the laundry, get washed, bring them back, fold them, package them, sterilize them. Today you just open a package, they're sterile.
What do you think it takes then to be a good OR nurse?
Well, you have to have endurance, that's for sure. Patience, the ability to move fast, stay awake, and have the patient in mind at all times.
The patient.
Right.
How about endurance, Netta? How is it now, the longest operation that you've been in? Do you know what that was? And how do you have that endurance to stay, alert?
I think God gives you the strength. We've had very bad accidents, patients bleeding, that we worked on 12 hours, 16 hours, and you just did it. And when you were through, you went to bed and collapsed.
Do you remember Dr. Kelleher or Dr. Durago or any of the older doctors that have now gone, like Dr. McLaughlin or Dr. Joyce?
I remember all of them.
You do?
I remember Dr. McLaughlin gave anesthesia, and he was very good at it. And he was always happy. When he came in, everything was bright and cheery.
Now, to talk about Dr. McLaughlin, you were telling that one story.
Oh, and because he was always happy when he came in, so he started to get things ready for the patient, and he started to sing, "There's no tomorrow," and we were going, shh. He didn't realize it, but it was funny.
He was always happy-go-lucky?
Always happy-go-lucky. The doctors as a whole that we had at Choate were very nice.
Right. Did you ever have an argument with any of them?
Yes. I'm not going to say who.
No. Did you win?
Sometimes.
Uh-huh.
Most of the time. Like I had a nun that was working for me, And the doctor was very mean to her because he didn't know she was a nun, not that it made any difference. But I told him that if he wanted to work in this OR, that he had to watch his language, that we had people around that don't like that sort of stuff. And he looked at me and he said, "Why?" So I said, "Well, we do have a nun and we have young girls working here." He calmed down. He calmed down.
He did.
Yeah.
When you look back at your experience at Choate Hospital, what sticks with you the most? I mean, what means the most to you, do you think, of all those 30-some-odd years you've worked there in the operating room?
I think one of the things was a man that I knew that loved to dance. And he had to have a total hip done, and it was the first total hip that we did. And Dr. Lanigan did it. And then a couple months from then, I was at a Sons of Italy party, and he was there dancing a storm. So it was wonderful to see that we had helped this man get back to what he enjoyed doing.
What do you miss about nursing the most since you've been retired?
I enjoyed visiting the patients before surgery, talking to them, and visiting them after surgery, interested in how they were doing, and if we did our job, if we did it well. Mm-hmm. It's nice to see a smile on a person's face that's been sick, and you know that you've helped them a little bit. Yeah.
The decade of the 1950s saw the impact of the family doctor on the lives of Woburn families. Doctors Joyce, Devine, Wilcox, Dorego, and McLaughlin, to name a few, often treated their patients not only in their offices but at the patient's home. Sick children were visited at their bedside by these dedicated men of medicine at all hours of the day and night. When necessary, they would treat their young patients in school, as we see here during the polio scare of that decade. It should be noted that Dr. Devine opened one of the first polio clinics in Massachusetts. A hospital cannot function at a high performance without a strong infrastructure. The unsung heroes who work behind the scenes in administration, food services, laundry, and maintenance elevated the quality of hospital care to an optimum level. Tribute must be given to those workers, more than often unseen by the public, but nevertheless in their own way added to the positive experience of a patient. The era of the 1960s and 70s brought a combination of further expansion, bad economy, budget woes, and a drop in census, but there was no drop in enthusiasm and public interest in the hospital. New leaders emerged who took the mantle of responsibility for directing the future of the hospital. Names such as R. Wade Johnson, Arthur A. Vino, Guy Pelage, Francis D. Wall, and Charles Mahoney became active trustees. This period introduced donations from a new source, the service clubs. The Kiwanis, Rotary, and Lions clubs were consistent and active participants in fundraising for the hospital. The People's Hospital included valuable support from many volunteers. This support group gathered its members from all sectors of the city. Its importance was so significant that a director of volunteers, Jeanette West, was hired. As more volunteers came forward, additional roles were added. Volunteers assisted patients, worked in the coffee shop, organized teas for employees, became candy stripers, delivered flowers, and eventually appeared at every department of the hospital.
What was the main purpose of the Hospital Aid Association, as you understood it when you came on?
Well, it was social, but it was to raise money for the hospital.
It was.
Everything we did, was to raise money for the fashion shows and Flower Day and our dances and our Christmas bazaars and things, yeah.
You did. And how much money did you raise? Like, say, for the Geranium Day?
Oh, we did quite well in Japan. I don't
right.
remember just what it was, but we did very.
Each year you had the same customers. That,
Right.
Oh, you did?
And all-
yes,
yeah.
yeah.
And how many flowers would you sell? Because
Oh,
it was originally called
hundreds of-
flowers.
Yeah, but
Flower
hundreds
day.
and hundreds of geraniums. We get them from Spence. And the whole yard out here would be full of geraniums.
It was
And
a
the people-
beautiful sight, really,
Yeah.
to see. Yeah.
And the people would come, who ordered them would come and pick them up.
So now you go from being a volunteer to working here. And what year did
Well,
you start?
I started, years ago, you collected every day for televisions.
Can
It
you
was like
imagine?
$2 a day for your television. And Jeanette West did it Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. And then Polly McColligan did it the rest of the week. And a couple of times Jeanette was away or something, so she asked me if I would do it. And I just thought it was going to be, voluntary. Well, come to find out, I got to be an employee because I did televisions. That's how I started as an employee.
Collecting
So-
money.
Yes, you went around to the whole hospital and got their $2 if they wanted the television for the next day.
Yeah. How did you like working in the hospital?
Oh, I loved it. I'd probably still be here if it was the hospital.
You would. Did
I
you
would.
enjoy it too, Eileen? Working here?
Well, of course, I never worked here.
But I mean, just to being in the hospital.
Yes, yeah.
So you
oh,
worked.
Yeah.
I mean, you were in
Oh,
here.
yes, yeah.
Oh, I loved that job. I
Yeah.
really did.
And everybody knew her. She was perfect for the job.
Was she?
Perfect. Oh, perfect.
Yeah.
She was so pleasant. It was a joy to come in and meet her.
I enjoyed
It's a high
it.
compliment.
I enjoyed the job. I really did. That's
you,
why.
you knew you did. because
That's
you were
why when they
always-
offered me the job for director of volunteers, I said no. I liked my my job at the desk. I went home at 4:00, and then Bella DePietro worked at night, and
Yeah.
she took over, and then I would come back at 8 in the morning. So there was no. I did the volunteer part for 3 months until they got Nancy McCursey.
I was born in the Choate Hospital, and I was the only one in the family that was born in the Choate Hospital. Everybody else was born at home, but I always, my brothers and sisters always thought I was a big shot because I was
You were
born in the hospital.
Well, did it mean it that much to you also, Eileen, when you look back?
Oh yes, it was a sad day when and it was for the men that were on the board. They felt very badly because of course they knew that when Leahy came, that was the end of the hospitals, the smaller hospitals.
What is it that means the most to the years that you've put in here at Choate Hospital?
Well, with me, it was just the people. The people I met at that desk were so nice. I would meet them on the street, and I probably wouldn't remember their name, but they were friendly. They were nice. One lady came in one day, and she was thanking me, and I said, "What? Your husband was in the fire department, and he saved my husband's life." And just things like that. And I would meet them on the street. They were all friendly and nice. I mean, I really enjoyed that job.
It touched your heart.
I really did, yeah.
The age of the baby boomers came to Choate in full force. The maternity and nursery were busy places. Doctors O'Grady, Cackness, and Lombardo are familiar names to any parent whose child was born at the Choate. One doctor, however, has an interesting note on his resume. Born in Woburn, Dr. James McDonough delivered an impressive 17,000 babies in his career. When medical care was required for infants or children, pediatricians Anino and McLean were longtime physicians specializing in this area and were fixtures at the hospital. Dr. Donald Anino is still in practice today.
Remember when I was in the 7th grade, one of my classmates had epilepsy, and she had seizures in the classroom, and I thought how awful that was, and I wanted to make her better, and that was the start of it. I wanted to make her better, and that's why I became a nurse. And I graduated from Lawrence Memorial in Medford in 1964, and I stayed there for a year, and then I went to the Choate in 1966, and I worked in maternity and obstetrics, and I was there for about 10 years. And it was a great experience. I worked for 2 years on the day shift, and then I started having children myself, so I worked 3 to 11. And I saw a lot of babies born, and a lot of babies of my girlfriends. I'd go with them and stay with them where they'd deliver, and it was a fun time. It really was.
It was. We'll come back to it, but I wanted to bring Carol in. Carol, you are not an RN.
No.
And what did you go to school for?
I went to surgical tech school, and when I went to Choate for a job, they offered me the emergency room.
And what is the surgical tech?
I went to the Northeast Regional postgraduate program in Wakefield.
Is it that you would be in the OR handling the
Instruments, assisting the doctors.
Mm-hmm. And so you went to the emergency room. What changed, and how did your job change going into the emergency room?
Well, I had just graduated. I didn't work in the OR at all. I went to the Choate, and they offered me the job, and I was there for 18 years.
Oh, really? So you never went in the OR? Emergency room was totally different. Mary Ellen, I wanted to go back to obstetrics. It's changed a lot since you first started.
Yes, it has.
The way women have children, I mean, really, as far as the technique and how it was done. They had wards in those days at Choate Hospital, if I remember.
Yes,
myself.
we had some 6-bed wards, 4-bed wards, a couple of private rooms. And when women went into labor years ago in the late 60s and 70s, they used to medicate them very, very heavily at the beginning, and they call it twilight sleep. And a lot of women don't even remember any part of their labor or delivery or anything, which is a good thing. But then again, you know, now more women are having babies naturally, and no anesthesia, no medication, and they do very well with that. And the babies are healthier for it too, because usually when they did the twilight sleep, the babies would take the same medication as the moms, so the moms were snowed, and when the babies were born, they were very, very sluggish, and some of them had to be resuscitated. So there's not that anymore, because the babies are pretty healthy, coming out screaming. And sometimes emergency sections, you know, and we had 2 delivery rooms, and when a mother had to have an emergency section, we had to swing her over into the next room really quick, and it was always an emergency. But we had a lot of good luck too, a lot of healthy babies born. And
how many babies do you think that you helped deliver?
I lost count of how many I assisted to deliver, but I would say probably over 1,000 or more.
That's amazing,
yeah,
isn't it?
It was a fun job, but it was also a sad job too, because we had some, you know, real sick babies born that didn't make it, but most of them were pretty healthy. I used to work 3 to 11 because I had my children too. And in 1977, I went down to the emergency room. Carol was leaving for maternity leave, and I offered to go down to the emergency room, and I stayed there until it closed. I worked in the emergency room, which I loved.
You did like it?
Yes, I did.
Did you find it very different and more rewarding, or just?
Well, it was very fast-paced, and we had an expression, treat and street. We'd bring people in, they were sick, they were in pain, they had to have stitches, you took care of them, and we sent them out smiling, most of them. Then we had a lot of other different things going on too.
Absolutely. Carol, when you started down at the emergency room, were you prepared for some of the things that you would see and experience?
No, I was 19 and I wasn't experienced for any of it.
How did you react to that? I mean, you weren't an RN either, so it's a longer program, I would assume. So who mentored you, and how did you get through all that?
All these girls that I worked with, they were wonderful. They're still friends 30 years later, 40 years later, and
it's amazing, isn't it? Can you remember the most difficult thing, or the first thing that you can remember that you had to work on a patient when they came in and through the emergency room?
When I first came, it was Halloween, and a 16-year-old boy was coming out of church and was hit by a car, and he had severe brain injury, and they had to do surgery in the emergency room on the patient.
Did you have to assist in any way? You did?
One of the neurosurgeons came in.
And did he make it?
He did make it.
Did he? That's rewarding too, right
It was,
there.
yeah.
But how stressful is that to be 19? And
It was very stressful.
I do remember one time we had a very arrogant patient, and he was right across from the nursing station, and he was arguing with the doctor, and all of a sudden the argument stopped, and all I could hear was and I looked over, and the patient had the doctor by his tie, and he was literally strangling him. So we had to go, Carol and I both went over and we got the patient off the doctor, and, you know, he undid his tie and we saved the doctor's life, basically. But
Oh.
but that's just one difficult patient.
We had a lot of
lots more.
difficult.
We had lots more.
Can you remember anything that really bothered you?
Well, I referred back to the SIDS baby, sudden infant death.
It does seem to be
syndrome.
the children.
Yes, it was always children. You know, before I had children, I was always affected by it. But after you have children, it's a gut feeling that, oh my goodness, this is somebody's baby. And that was very, very sad. And of course, all the young people that, you know, the drownings, the couple of other stories about, you know, children, you know, hanging themselves. And that was very difficult. And we had such a camaraderie. There wasn't any counseling. Nobody offered us any counseling. We counseled each other and cried on each other's shoulder, and then we'd laugh together. So if it wasn't for the people that we worked with, you know, we wouldn't have been able to get through it.
What about you, Carol? Is there a case that has affected you, or you know, that you can remember very clearly?
I remember a little boy coming in. He was at his grandparents' house, and they had taken the septic tank off the cover. They were going to have it drained, and the little boy had fallen into it, and he had drowned. And it was, I'll never forget it. It was just terrible.
Was there always a prankster or a jokester that was
Oh,
working?
yes. I think Carol was one of them.
Oh, I would never have guessed.
I know Carol
She's very
was
quiet
one of
right
them.
now, but I would never have guessed.
Very serious.
Yeah,
but
right. She's being very serious. She has her
Yes.
serious face on, but we know better.
One time she came to me and she said, "There's a lady in the waiting room, and she's very hard of hearing, so you have to really speak up." So I went out to her and I said, "Mrs. Brown, it's time to come in." And she said, "Why are you shouting at me?" And I said, "Oh, I thought you were hard of hearing." No. And it was my friend who was behind the curtain laughing. But I think I got even with her a few times.
Did you?
too, but
Good.
That's how we
okay.
coped with
That's how
what-
we coped.
Mary Ellen, what did nursing mean to you now that you look back? And I know you're going to retire soon. After how many years?
Over 50. Over 50. Like I say, when I was, 12, 13, I decided I wanted to be a nurse, and I've never regretted it. I like taking care of people. I like making them feel better, and just taking care of people and then making them better and sending them home. That was the best part of it.
So it's true.
And I know they were grateful. They didn't even have to say thank you. Sometimes just a touch of the hand or a squeeze of the hand and a nod, and that made me happy.
What do you think it takes to make a good nurse in this day and age?
Probably compassion. Compassion is the biggest thing, that you want to help someone, and if you don't want to help someone and you're selfish, I don't think you need to be a nurse.
The 1960s and 70s were turbulent times in the country and in Woburn. Besides the tannery fires and fire bombings, the city saw rapid industrial expansion, increased development of homes and apartments, and therefore more people to serve. Being located at the intersection of two major highways, more cars and more accidents became commonplace. With all of this, it was inevitable that an increase in critical care would be required. The emergency room at Choate was the one department that saw it all.
When I graduated from high school, 57, and in September I went to Mount Auburn Hospital in Cambridge for 3 years. Stayed there for a year working in maternity, and then got married. Went to Lawrence and worked at Lawrence General for 9 years. I had my kids up there, and then moved back to Woburn and started at Choate in October of 69. And I started working evenings on med-surg floor. And then a friend of mine was on nights, as night supervisor, Paula Monbouquet, so I went on nights. And I worked nights part-time, off and on, and on the floors, med-surg. The opportunity for the ER came, and seeing that I'm kind of hyper at times, I thought I might like it, and I did. I loved it. I got down to the ER, and I worked part-time. Dottie Stark was the full-time nurse, and I was the part-time on her days off. And then I'd work extra, maybe on the floor too sometimes.
Was it evenings that you worked in the emergency room?
No, nights. Oh, I was all by myself
So
down there.
so that's 11 to like
11 to 7, yeah.
11 to
Yeah.
7, right. I'm going to just ask Donna. Donna, tell me when you went to nursing school, where you went, and when you started at Choate.
I graduated in 1970 from the Burlington High School and then went right to Lowell General, which is a 3-year diploma school, and graduated in 73. I had been going to nursing school and I worked actually in Central Supply. Do you remember? Central Supply downstairs during nursing school. And then when I graduated, I went up to the 3rd floor and worked med-surg for a while. Did some assistant nurse manager and always wanted to go to the emergency room. Used to see these girls in the cafeteria. And then there was a position available, so I went down. It was nights. Ann taught me a lot, right? And that was in
Now,
73.
emergency room is a whole different type of nursing.
Yeah.
You have to be really quick on your feet, I would assume.
Yep.
And what do you think it takes to be an emergency room nurse?
Stamina, a lot of times.
I was going to say humor, too.
And humor.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. You have to have that. I mean, you
On
have
the off
these
times.
dire situations, these very, very serious situations, very, very sick people coming in, and you have codes coming in, and there's always, you're really tense and everything, but then all of a sudden somebody cracks, and you know, the tension is released. But it's working with all of these doctors and different ones that you had to be very flexible working down there also.
Why is that, Ian?
Everybody's different the way they want things and handle things. But it was a good thing. It was good because you learn a lot. Tell me.
Well, I think one of the things, too, in the emergency room, someone once said it well to me, is that you, nothing ever good happens. You know, where else do you work that you see pain and suffering and dying and illness all the time, your whole shift. And it can take a toll on you. All of us have cried with people when they've died or afterwards. We've had a code and it's tragic, and then you cry together with the family, with each other. But then someday, in a couple of days, then you can laugh again about something that's
Good.
totally aside or something that's funny.
Don't you
You
agree?
meet so many people, and some are very nice to get along with and pleasant, and then some are very difficult to get along. You have to be flexible. You have to try and bounce off of them and read them and try and help them as best you can. Children were a bad thing when you see SIDS. That's an awful thing.
And what
Awful
to explain
thing.
what that is, not that not everyone doesn't know, but
Well, crib death.
Right.
When a child comes in and or they come in for another reason, for illness, and then they die, that's an awful thing. Awful for women because you're mothers, and to see somebody lose a child, that takes its toll seriously. Really,
That's
I mean, an
painful.
old adult, you know, you see a sick person, but when you see a child, they haven't lived. That's a very hard thing to do.
absolutely.
To see.
Absolutely.
You need
One of the
something.
special connections I think that you had in Choate is the police department, because you worked in the 70s, I take it, right? Is that when you started? and
Right.
stuff? So when you're there, at that time, the police manned the ambulance. Can't you tell me a great story about, first of all, the relationship you would have to have with the police at that time, and then obviously the equipment that is totally different than it is now, and how it was done.
They had the old Cadillac ambulance, is what I remember, and nurses always wore white uniforms, dress uniforms, and I'll never forget it. The first day we got the okay that we could wear pant uniforms. I went out and bought one quickly, and I had it on the night, and I was working that night. And the doctor that was on was Dr. Barry Dorn. He used to moonlight. That's who covered the ER at night way back in those days, with these doctors that were in the residencies in Boston. But they would come and moonlight and work the ER. They'd be on call. And he was on that particular night, and we got a severe car accident, and this person really smashed their nose and their face. And he decided he was going to ride in the ambulance also to go into Boston, into Mass General. And the police came in their little ambulance, and off we went. And I went with them. And I was very happy that I had, because of the way you had to sit, I was very happy to have had those, had a pantsuit on.
That's right.
It was world. Yeah, and then they drove us back to Woburn. No stops. I used to hear about they'd stop for coffee and donuts, but that wasn't true.
Very serious. They used to drive us down to Waltham, to Tupelo Road, if we had a female psych, one of us would have to go in the car. And do you remember the police would come? We'd get in the back seat with the patient, and the police would drive us down to Waltham and then bring us back in the cruiser.
I never
to bring
did
them
that.
to the psych facility
Yeah.
down there.
You know, that's another a piece of it too, is that the type of patients that come in, as you say, they're usually it's an emergency room for a reason. It's called that. I'm sure you have people that come that just don't have health insurance, and that's where they come. But how about people with mental illness or homeless? How that must be very difficult too, actually, to deal with.
It is. It is. I don't think we ever even knew about insurance. We never even thought about whether they had insurance or not. We would just take care of them. Somehow I think there's more psych patients today than there were then. What do
Because
you
you're
think,
still
Ann?
working, Donna, at
Right,
Winchester
right.
Hospital. And your role at Winchester Hospital is
The nurse manager now.
nurse manager.
Yeah.
That's a different kind of title than they would have. Is that like a head nurse? Is that different?
Well, it went from head nurse to charge nurse. No, this is the manager who worries about the budget, worries about the staff, worries about the patients, the press gainies, the patient satisfaction. You worry. It's just a different kind of worry. That's all.
But you're not treating patients?
No, I will still help though. I'll still go to the department, start IVs, help them, transport patients. But no, I don't get an assignment or anything like that.
Very different than when you
Understood.
first started. How about the training? What is the difference in nurse training when you first started and graduated from nursing school, and what is required of men and women now that graduate?
No, I don't think there's any comparison. When we went, it was a simple 3-year by the bedside, take care of the patients, the back rubs.
Keep the water pitcher full and dust
Keep
dust the bedside table.
But you learned how to be a nurse and
Yeah.
a person and
And
a
to bedside.
caregiver. Now it's all numbers and
Computers.
computers and I think the little touch that we learned.
How about the fire department now? The police no longer handle the ambulance in the mid-'70s, and now it becomes, EMTs, and the training has changed. And I would assume you work very closely, with the fire departments in these communities, being in the emergency room, even when at Choate and then into Winchester
Right.
Hospital.
We were very close with the fire department when they had the ambulance. The girls, the whole department in Choate Emergent, there's a sisterhood there. And we still, even after it's closed over 20 years, we're still very close to each other. And the firemen, well, they've gone off and whatever, but they were always wonderful to us. If we ever needed any help when they were there, they were always willing to help us out. They'd do CPR if we had, if they brought in a code. Big, strong guys anyways that would do that. And they really were a help to all of us. And they brightened our day some days,
Right.
And then Friedlander and Tucker joined them, and Dr. Rubin, but he went on his own. Then there was Burlington Medical, which was Tassel, Goldman, Doan, McCarthy, Portney. Those
She
were
knows them all.
She knows them
She
all.
does, thank God. Yeah.
Burlington Medical.
The
I remember
orthopedic
Dr.
Rowan.
Kelleher when I first went there and having to call him one night. A patient wanted a sleeping pill, which was a big thing to do. And when he thanked me for calling, and I hung up the phone, and I said, "That was a gentleman." You didn't know. Some of them could be very fresh to you, or rude to you. He was always a gentleman, from what I remember of Dr. Kelleher. I remember Dr. Durago. He always liked to talk politics, get you in a corner and talk politics. But those were and then the surgeons. We had Dr. Vino, and whose father was head of the the hospital way back in the 60s.
And Dr. Wisniewski.
And Wisniewski eventually, he started out
Wonderful.
moonlighting
Yep.
at Choate Hospital, and then he met Vino, and they worked together. What other surgeons did we have?
I was just thinking orthopedic, we Dr. Rowan, Dr. Pettit.
And Hazel.
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 Yep, that
And then
group.
Dr.
Yeah,
Dorn
so-
joined them when he got out of his
Right.
residency.
I wanted to
He
ask.
was a breath of fresh air.
Who
Dr.
what?
Dorn.
We
He
did
was
have fun with
always
him.
doing
He's a
stuff
good
to
guy.
us,
Yep.
and we were always
We
doing
laughed
things.
a lot with,
That's
We had a
wonderful.
wonderful head nurse that the two of them they were funny.
What do you think the most rewarding thing is for you as a nurse?
I think for me, it's when the patient just says thank you and looks at you and just appreciates that you're there. They don't have to do anything else. It's just all about that connection that you feel with people.
Right.
And when they appreciate what you've done, they don't even have to say thank you. Just you feel it. You know that you've done the right thing. You're taking care of them. What do you think?
I think,
What do you think, Ed?
what do I think?
And what
I
makes
think
you
the
so
same
feel
thing.
rewarded?
I just always loved nursing.
It's
It's not for everybody.
No,
no,
I
it's
don't think
not.
so.
It's not.
Always wanted to be a nurse since I was 7. My aunt was a nurse, and she used to go to work with her white uniform and her handkerchief in her pocket with her pin, her hat on, and her white shoulders perfume. And I always looked at her and said, "Oh, I'm going to be a nurse just like her." And that's how I was.
I think for some it's more of a calling than
Yeah.
it is like a profession or a career. It just it's something in you that you just.
I was just curious, what do you think was the most difficult thing for you to see in all your years of working? Was there something that stays in your memory?
I think that there's 2 serious kids that we took care of. One was a 3-year-old who drowned, and that was terrible. Watching the grandparents and the parents, and then Sid's baby that I carried to the morgue. It's to see people suffer is tough.
I had
What's
a
your worst?
motorcycle accident come in from Wilmington at night. They were hit by a drunk driver, and one of them was dead, and the other one, I was taking the lower leg out of a boot. He's over there, and I'm over here. Motorcycle accident.
It was bad.
Yeah, that's very hard to see.
It is.
It's almost like post-traumatic stress in a lot of ways.
In a lot of ways, yeah.
Don't you think so? I mean, because you have to go home like a fireman or a policeman when you see, because you are first responders,
Yeah.
and you are the front line. So I think that
And if they don't understand at home, I remember one night I was given meds or something. My husband called, and they said, "Well, she can't come to the phone. She's with a cardiac arrest." So when I got home, he says, "Donna, who did the police bring in under arrest tonight?" Like, what? It's because they didn't. No one gets it unless they actually work it.
Yeah.
They don't understand. You have to work nights, weekends, holidays.
And we
you're not
do
gonna
our
be at
share, don't we?
Thanksgiving, you know.
Yep.
Yeah. Nobody really gets it unless they work that. But that's okay. We get it.
you get it. Well, that's why you do it. That's why you're still doing it.
Right.
Is there anything else that you want me to
No,
ask
the only
you?
thing is Choate should have stayed open so we could still be having fun with that group.
I know.
It
This
was
is
a good,
true.
Good group.
This is true.
Yeah.
Good patients.
I've
to
heard
stay
that a
together.
lot, though. It was
Yeah.
a nice community hospital.
It was a
really.
good community hospital, and so many people have said since, I wish Choate was still there.
Yeah,
I wish
right.
Choate was still there. You know, they wish it hadn't closed.
But I
Because
have to put a plug in for Winchester. It's very much like that.
Yes.
It's very wonderful to come.
I worked there, Donna.
Donna, you have to remember, when the Choate people went to work there, they brought the class to
Okay, well,
Winchester
maybe so, but
Hospital.
whatever-
it was
whatever it took,
it was
it's
the
fine.
Choate nurses that got there
But it's
and
good.
added to the Winchester
I'm
Hospital.
just going to put my 2 cents in for that
That's
ER
good.
over there at
and
Winchester.
no, and I'm not going to knock it. I worked there for
Hybrid.
20 odd years too, so I loved it there.
Yeah. It's a wonderful hospital also.
It is.
It is.
And, you know, we just made 94th% of patient satisfaction likelihood to recommend, and 90th percent overall for the emergency room. That's huge too,
That's very
Absolutely.
huge.
because it's the same group, same type of people that we used to have years ago at Choate that care. They really do care, and that's the bottom line. You have to do that.
Absolutely.
In the 1970s, the Choate faced the realities of increased medical costs and competition. Perhaps the most compelling event occurred in 1976, when the Choate Memorial Hospital closed its maternity ward, when the last babies were born in February. It was an unfortunate portent for the future, for in a few short years a merger with Sims Hospital in Arlington was formed in an effort to save our local hospital. Eventually, both hospitals met their demise. While the last patient was served in 1989, the last employee of the Choate Memorial Hospital left work early on January 26, 1990, to attend a reception at the Sims Hospital. As the memorandum said, quote, "as a small token of our thanks," end quote. While Woburn bemoans the loss of our community hospital, the current facility continues to attend to the needs of Woburn citizens. Under the stewardship of the Cummings Foundation, New Horizons at Choate is a retirement community, an independent and assisted living residence. The on-site Choate Medical Center offers a group medical practice, a medical lab, physical therapy, Alzheimer's care, a dialysis clinic, and a child daycare. The Choate, as it is affectionately known, played an important role in the development of Woburn as a modern and thriving city. But more important, it is a symbol of its people as responsible and caring citizens. The Charles Choate Memorial Hospital, the People's Hospital, could not have existed and could not have grown if we as a community did not come together and make it happen. We gave our money, our land, our talents, and most of all, our hearts and souls to ensure that all of us could have a safe haven where good medical care would be provided. Throughout the hospital's 80-year history, the people of Woburn exhibited virtues of selflessness, caring, and service. While the Choate may be gone, its spirit still lives within us.